Hi everyone, Azalea Jane here. This video is the first of what I hope will be a series of videos examining and critiquing the book Bhagavad Gita as it is by A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami from my atheist and apostate perspective. I was involved in the Krishna Consciousness movement for several years. I traveled to India, took initiation in 2007. Later, I drifted away in my deconversion to atheism. But this book was the first one I received when I first went to a program. It's an impressive, hefty tome, and they really like to give it out to newcomers. You've probably heard of the Bhagavad Gita. It's one of the most revered scriptures in India. This book has the original Sanskrit, and for each verse there's a transliteration, a word-by-word translation, a prose translation, and a purport, which can be seen as an explanation or a commentary. This video was inspired by a similar series by YouTuber Shives and his Atheist Reads series. In that series, he'd take a book of Christian apologetics and respond to it. I decided to do something similar with this book. This video, and possibly series, is intended for anyone who's interested. Former believers looking for community and support, current believers who want to be challenged by someone they disagree with, and especially toward anyone who's just received this book and might not be sure what to do with it. I'll give a little bit of background on the Krishna Consciousness movement. Boomers and some Gen Xers will be much more familiar with these folks. The author of this book, at age 70 or so, traveled to the U.S., gained a following, and founded ISKCON in 1966. He died about a decade later. While he was alive, the movement exploded and was very popular among counterculture hippies. The specific religion he spread could be seen as a particular variety of monotheistic Hinduism, one that specifically worships Vishnu in the form of Krishna. The movement has been known as Krishna Consciousness, Gaudiya Vaishnavism, Bhakti Yoga, and in larger culture, just the Hare Krishnas. Hare Krishna is actually the name of the mantra that devotees sing in public and chant every day, but it also has come to be known with the religion and the people. Side note, I was not involved with ISKCON myself, specifically, but with another temple practicing the same theology. The founder of my temple and A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, the author of Bhagavad Gita as it is, they had the same teacher, and they were colleagues and respected each other. And my own guru was the successor of that person. Okay, let's begin. If you want to follow along and you don't have the book yourself, you can read it online. I'll put a link in the description so you can follow along. The preface to this book is not particularly long, but it contains a few themes in it that the author will touch on a lot, and a few themes that I will touch on a lot. So I'm spending a little more time on it proportionally than I probably will for future entries. So, starting out, after an explanatory editorial paragraph, A.C. launches into making the case for his movement. He cites its growing popularity, which was true in 1971, talks about how important it is, gives credit to his own teacher, and so forth. Quote, "Our Krishna Consciousness movement is genuine, historically authorized, natural, and transcendental due to its being based on Bhagavad Gita as it is. It is gradually becoming the most popular movement in the entire world, especially amongst the younger generation." So there's a lot to unpack here. First, when he says genuine, what does that mean in a religious context? Some religions are older than others, but all started at some point. What are other genuine movements? What makes a movement not genuine? I have a similar question with historically authorized. Whose authority? Why does it matter? Natural is a very interesting one because, again, what distinguishes a natural movement from an unnatural one? How do you get to tell what is natural and what isn't? Within a closed system, everything is natural. The only thing unnatural would be interference from an outside actor on that system. Is he suggesting that some movements happen unnaturally? Now, I suppose that what he probably means is that this movement was not manufactured by some government or corporation, but instead was made up of sincere people expressing their desires honestly. I'll definitely grant that. But it's still interesting to consider what these words mean when people use them. Here, it's obviously being used to advertise the legitimacy of this particular movement. However, In the next sentence, he kind of tips his hand and shows us where he's coming from. He fancies his, or our, movement the most important in the world. He makes it plain again, skipping ahead a few paragraphs, quote, "The Krishna Consciousness movement is essential in human society, for it offers the highest perfection of life. How this is so is explained fully in the Bhagavad Gita." Step back and reflect a bit on what kind of mindset that takes. There are billions of people in the world, thousands of religious sects, and this man, with a straight face, claiming to be humble, thinks so highly of himself, thinks his position in the world is so important, that he presents to us in total sincerity the claim that his movement is the most important one, full stop. Now, I know I'm being a little unfair, because this is nothing new. Every religion claims that, but that's actually part of my point. This religion is nothing new. It's not unique, it's not special, it's not true in any sense that I can see, and it has no more evidence for its veracity than any other. Like every other self-styled spiritual teacher, he gives lip service to humility, crediting everything to his own teacher, whose name and titles combined take up a line and a half of text. If I have any credit in this connection, it does not belong to me personally, but is due to my eternal spiritual master, His Divine Grace, Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivajakacharya 108 Sri Srimad Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaja Prabhupada. This is something worth touching on. There's a theme found in many religions of individuals taking the blame for everything bad while taking no credit for anything good. Credit is always given to God, Jesus, or in this case, Krishna, and or one's guru. However, that guru in turn would take no credit for himself, it's always a him, but give it all to his master, and so on. I see some contradictions here. First, there's the obvious difference of opinion when it comes to a person's qualities. A disciple thinks their guru is everything, while that guru himself will claim to be nothing. Now, don't get me wrong, I do appreciate the value of being self-effacing, not being too ego-invested, lifting others up, giving credit, etc. But these folks and others, in my opinion, take it to an extreme. They basically profess themselves to be worthless, while also heaping praise on another person, a person they get to be associated with. Long story short, it's still an ego game. Even though ACB gives all credit to his guru, the pomp and circumstance with which he talks about his guru shows that he, like anyone else in such a situation, is still deriving ego gratification from the situation, all while putting on a front of being humble. It's quite insidious, and of course it's not unique to any religion. He would argue that it is the guru's job to take the praise, to be a recipient of the praise because someone has to, but in turn mentally pass on the praise or credit to his guru, considering himself only the vessel, and eventually, supposedly, going back up to Krishna. This is what I think he means by, quote, historically authorized, as if a simple claim of an unbroken line of succession were enough to establish that. But again, this raises the contradiction. Is my guru praiseworthy or not? If he appears to accept my compliments or my praise, but then just mentally pass it on to someone else, is he really accepting it? Does he believe me if I speak highly of him, or is he mentally refusing? To me, this is, again, sort of an inverse egoism. My answer is, of course, with everything, to find a balance. I believe that we should always give credit where it's due. I personally like and recommend slightly downplaying one's achievements, but also accepting them. Accepting that this person, I have qualities. I have unique things to offer. I'm not useless. I'm not a lowly, worthless worm, or any of the other insults we were trained to call ourselves. Some good, some bad, a lot of gray, like everyone. He talks a bit, complaining that many others have attempted to take the Gita and interpret it, twisting it to fit their own agenda, and claims the Gita must be approached without, quote, unauthorized commentary, or else one will not go back to Godhead. I have tried to present Bhagavad Gita as it is, without any adulteration. Before my presentation of Bhagavad Gita as it is, almost all the English editions of Bhagavad Gita were introduced to fulfill someone's personal ambition. Here's the first mention in this book of another theme you'll find here, which is that he is supposedly presenting the Bhagavad Gita as it is without interpretation. This phrase, without interpretation, I heard used frequently. Now, of course, this is highly disingenuous. Everything is an interpretation. What he's doing here is assuming that A, there is or can be an authoritative understanding of the Gita, and B, that he has it. Once again, this comes back to the very thinly veiled egoism of the author. Generally, the so-called scholars, politicians, philosophers, and swamis, without perfect knowledge of Krishna, try to banish or kill Krishna when writing commentary on Bhagavad Gita. Such unauthorized commentary upon Bhagavad Gita is known as Mayavada Bhashya, and Lord Chaitanya has warned us about these unauthorized men. Here's another theme, and if you're an ex-fundamentalist of any kind, you'll probably find this familiar. People like the author here will casually dismiss the entire fields of the natural sciences, philosophy, political science, and even theology, as such as it is, when these fields make claims that are contradictory to their religious beliefs. Here we see the core lie of religion. It claims to have knowledge, yet for every other attempt humans make to gain knowledge about our shared reality, the empirical world, there are always religious people opposing it. This, again, as I'll say over and over in these commentaries, is nothing new. It's the same stuff you hear from fundamentalist Christians, Muslims, and many others. It's a hostility to the idea that humans can fare on our own and can figure stuff out without some external spiritual authority. So what really cracks me up here is the author's sanctimonious condemnation of commentary, ignoring that he is, in this very moment and for the rest of the book, making commentary. He wants to be able to do what everyone else does, and spout his opinion on the Gita and be taken seriously. But he also wants to make like his opinion reflects the most basic and fundamental reality, even though he is a human brain. Again, once you stop drinking the Kool-Aid just for a second, the monstrous and hilarious egoism and arrogance become increasingly obvious. Our only purpose is to present this Bhagavad Gita as it is in order to guide the conditioned student to the same purpose for which Krishna descends to this planet once in a day of Brahma, or every 8,600,000,000 years. This purpose is stated in the Bhagavad Gita, and we have to accept it as it is. Otherwise, there is no point in trying to understand the Bhagavad Gita and its speaker, Lord Krishna. I disagree with this. I say that I don't have to accept a book's own claims for itself to gain an understanding of the book and its historical context, or what it meant to the people who wrote it and who still read it. All of this, of course, is assuming that there is a Krishna and that he authored the Gita, both unsubstantiated claims. Going on, quote, Lord Krishna first spoke Bhagavad Gita to the sun god some hundreds of millions of years ago. We have to accept this fact and thus understand the historical significance of Bhagavad Gita without misinterpretation on the authority of Krishna. This is a wonderful example of a sentence that says, essentially, well, nothing. First, there's the claim about how Big K speaking the Big G to the sun god. Okay, that's an interesting claim, but how do you know? How does it relate to us now? Who is this sun god? And why did Krishna have to tell it to him? Who wrote it down? Did he speak it in Sanskrit verse? Specifically the type of Sanskrit that was spoken a few thousand years ago? Then, of course, there is the several mountains of geological, archaeological, and so forth evidence that humans weren't even around hundreds of million years ago, let alone languages or books. But that's just another unsubstantiated empirical claim made by a religious person. Nothing new. What I really love is the second sentence, where he says, we have to accept this fact. Why? According to whom? Or else what? Why should I agree? Why should I accept a fact presented with zero evidence or citation? Then, when he says, without misinterpretation. Here again we touch on the theme of interpretation, and how AC just assumes a position of authority or arbitration, ignoring the fact that he has no way of knowing, let alone showing, what is correct and incorrect interpretation. In other words, he's again trying to pass off his subjective opinion as cosmic fact. But really, this sentence is kind of the equivalent to, God wrote the Bible, and the Bible says God exists, therefore I believe. It's circular logic. He goes on, lamenting more about people who have used the Gita to their own agendas, that everyone should know God is great, everyone should know we are all servants, speak for yourself, that this world is illusory and that we have to go through birth and death, and so on, and then concludes the paragraph claiming that knowledge of this is a science. This is a point I will come back to. As I mentioned before, these folks will happily dismiss any and all scientific findings that they feel threatened by, but at the same time, these folks love the word science. They know that the word has cachet and authority, even though they denigrate actual science. All of these concepts may be thorough, specific, methodical, and so on. And all those things are necessary for good science, but they do not mean science. In fact, science is quite the opposite of what we find here. In my understanding, science is about humans investigating and coming to agreement about the nature of the empirical world, about our shared reality. It's about not taking anything for granted, questioning every assumption, ignoring so-called authority. The science talked about in these books, however, is kind of the opposite. They want us to give up our critical thinking skills. They kind of want us to give up any attachment to anything material. The preface continues talking about how people are distracted by the illusory material environment, seek after sense pleasure, and will not be happy until they stop all that and start serving God. Quote, by the spell of illusion, one tries to be happy by serving his personal sense gratification in different forms, which will never make him happy. Instead of satisfying his own personal material senses, he has to satisfy the senses of the Lord. That is the highest perfection of life. The Lord wants this, and he demands it. There's a lot to unpack here, too. First, the author presents a false dichotomy, one that is repeated ad nauseum throughout this and similar literature. You can devote yourself to mundane sense pleasure or devote yourself to God. This is, of course, bullshit on so many levels. First, for many, probably most people, an improvement of their material conditions will substantially improve their quality of life and satisfaction. Ignoring this is terribly insensitive and callous. If you tell a starving person to pray, you're a jerk. Second, this is simply repeating the lie that we hear from every other religion, that one can't be happy without God. Many religions preach this. It's demonstrably untrue and nothing new. Now, I agree. If I only serve my own immediate pleasures, I will not be happy. I recognize that many humans have a desire to serve. But we can find meaning through serving causes higher than ourselves that have nothing to do with God's, expect us to believe nothing on faith, and have everything to do with the betterment of ourselves and our species. Art, music, literature, philosophy, sciences, psychology, community, relationships, healing, giving, traveling, playing, sparring, fighting, loving, sharing sex, sharing resources, sharing ideas. All of this is meaningful and can help humans achieve some degree of purpose, and none of it requires belief in gods. Another interesting thing I want to touch on here is the concept of satisfying God's senses. And I remember hearing this a lot, satisfying Krishna's senses, that we shouldn't take sense pleasure for ourselves, but we should try to satisfy the senses of the Lord. This makes zero sense. No pun intended. We humans and every other animal, we have senses for a specific reason. We have senses to relay information from our bodies to our brains about our environment. Without our senses, our brains have literally no input, no information, no stimuli. We don't have intrinsic knowledge of what's around us. We have a handful of senses to get some idea of our environment, but even then, it's highly imperfect. We can't detect most of the electromagnetic spectrum. We can't touch extremely hot or cold things without damaging ourselves. We can't take in too much light or sound at a time without permanent damage. We have terrible smell compared to dogs. We have terrible sight compared to many animals, and so on. Senses are specifically an adaptation, a thing that we physical, mortal beings use to negotiate and survive our environment, which we need to do because we are fragile and temporary bodies. The existence of senses is rooted in our extremely limited and finite nature. So why then would a God need senses? Why does he need us, supposedly pathetic and worthless humans, to stimulate his senses for him? So finally, on the last two sentences of this quote, the Lord wants it. He demands it. This is a longer conversation, but why would a God want anything? Similar to senses, the concept of want is intrinsically linked to our limited, finite nature. The words want and need imply a lack. What does God lack that could possibly be filled by us? And why did he have to create such a system where there is so much suffering to get it? And finally, regarding, quote, he demands it, my answer is, so what? Why would God demand something of someone? If we're supposed to have free will, an infinitely powerful being who can save me or condemn me to suffering at a whim, demanding something doesn't really feel like that's free will in any meaningful sense. But even then, so what? What if I don't? I'm going to suffer? Is that a threat? So you're saying I should devote my life to pleasing the Lord's senses, whatever that means, or else? This isn't particularly appealing to me, and I really think that once you scratch the surface, this religion is just as incoherent and contradictory as any other. It looks pretty and exotic to Westerners. It has a very different and novel way of conceptualizing gods, but at the end of the day, it's basically more old dudes telling others what to do with their lives for no good reason and with no evidence. Well, that's the preface. There's a lot of exposition in this video, with a lot of the recurring themes, with several recurring themes appearing. Next, I'm going to do the introduction, which is actually very long. The preface was about 3.5 pages of text printed out on this PDF, and the introduction is about 40. So, good luck me. I hope you enjoyed this. Hey, Steve, if you're watching this, thank you. You've been an inspiration. I would love to hear any feedback. Anything I got right, anything I got wrong. I would love some engagement on this. And I'd like to hear where you're coming from. If you're a former believer, I'd especially love to hear from former believers. If you're a believer and you want to argue with me, just please be cordial. Think about what you say. Try to construct your arguments in clear manners. Please don't. Please understand where I'm coming from if you want to engage in sort of any kind of friendly debate on the issue. Okay. See you next time.